Mayor Robinson, welcome to our podcast. It's a real honor to have you here. Bellevue, Washington is just a beautiful city. I've been reading about your accomplishments and your beautiful city and just everything that I think every city wants to be and aspire to be. You're a tech hub. You just won the Civic League's kind of one of the finalists, 10 or 20 cities across the country that was named as kind of most resilient. I just thought that was awesome. I wanted to take some time to learn from you, your experiences in being the mayor of Bellevue and what you could share with our audience. So first off, how did you choose to kind of run for office and what kind of experience have you had so far?
Well, Shahryar, thank you for having me on your show today. It's not a clear path of how I got here. I've always been involved in the community. I've always done charitable work from a young age. And so I started on a Bellevue Network for Aging, which was a citizen advisory board for the city of Bellevue. And then I went on to the Parks Board. And from there, I became a city council member. And after doing that for 6 years, I was voted by my council peers to be the mayor. And so I am in my second year of being mayor and my 8th year of being on the Bellevue City Council.
Wow. And now you have a profession, so you're busy with your day job and being mayor. How does that work? How do you juggle?
No, I had to abandon my day job.
Okay. So
I did have a business that I really enjoyed.
Right.
I'm a physical therapist by training, and I had a business where I helped older adults age in place if that's what they chose to do. I did a little case management as well. But after becoming deputy mayor 3.5 years ago, it became my schedule was no longer reliable and I couldn't keep appointments with people. So
right. Well, that's commendable, just the fact that you carried on for as long as you did. Tell us about Bellevue. How would you characterize the city culture? Every community has their own culture of governing. And how do you relate to the region, the larger region around you, the Seattle, Washington area?
I think we pride ourselves in being different than Seattle, but we're also regional players, and we really identify as being part of the East Side, as they call it, which comprises all the east of the Lake Washington communities of Kirkland and Redmond and Renton and Issaquah, Sammamish. But we are about 147,000 people with a downtown that doubles in population every workday. So we go from being a medium city to a large city every workday. And it's very diverse. We have more people identifying as BIPOC than not, and 40% of our community identifies as the API community. So we have people from all over the world who come to live here. We have many different languages spoken. We have one of the highest education levels in the state. And that all comes together to make for really good neighbors and
Right.
a really interesting place to be. People really care about their children's education. I think that's a common denominator here. We have a very good public education system. And so people get along very well. And we see that diversity in our restaurants, in our arts, in our entertainment, and the festivals that we host here. It's evident everywhere you go in Bellevue, and I find it wonderful.
Wow. That sounds like a beautiful place. And as far as, different being Seattle, large tech community in general. So sometimes tech communities, when they flourish in an area, they raise housing prices. So how is housing affordability in your community?
Well, it's very high. The average home cost is now, I think, $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, but, affordable housing is political, as you
Right.
may already know. And
Sure.
so we had a council in place, I don't know how many years ago, a number of years ago, who were very positive towards affordable housing and actually put in mandated affordable housing in all development. A certain percentage had to be 80% area median income. And then the council switched. And so not only did they take away that mandate, but they reversed a lot of the affordable units and returned them back to market rate.
Wow.
So we were doing really well, and then we got way behind. And so that was one of my goals when I got on the council, was to create an affordable housing program, because not only do we need it to be a viable community, but the state and the county were about to take control of our authority to put in affordable housing. They're going to kind of do it for us. And one thing local government likes to have is local control.
Of course, of course. You know, it's interesting. You I think, characterized it perfectly. It is a political issue. In San Diego, I can tell you, affordability has always been a challenge. And through various councils, they have continued to incentivize developers to include affordable housing in their development more and more. And still, it's a challenge. It's an overwhelming challenge. I think our average home price might be around $550,000, $600,000, because San Diego is a very diverse and much larger, about 1.23 million in the city of San Diego proper. Yours is a lot smaller, and to have it see flip like that, I could see how that could be disconcerting for young first-time home buyers, people that just want to live in your beautiful community and having that challenge. So I commend you for leading the charge to right the ship.
Well, Shahriar, I have to tell you, in downtown Bellevue, only 10% of the people who work there can live in Bellevue.
Wow.
So you can imagine the tidal shift coming in the morning and out of commuters, and what the effect that has on our city. So it's my goal to make that number 50%.
Right. No, I think that's good. We have communities like this here in San Diego. I won't name them, but very affluent, beautiful, just a tourism hub. But people that work there typically can't live there. And it creates a significant traffic jam in the mornings as people are shuttling through in the arteries. And then the conversation moves towards, how do we improve traffic? Instead of how do we make things more affordable, how do we improve traffic flow? When that wasn't really it was a symptom, it wasn't the cause.
Exactly. And then the effect on the environment, I mean, the reduction in greenhouse gases is just going to be incredible if we can shift that number to 50% of people who are no longer commuting to work.
And you create a more walkable community. I think that's also a goal of San Diego and other communities, how to make the cities more walkable. A lot of our infrastructure isn't designed that way. The sidewalks are narrow, or the public transportation isn't that good. And a lot of the West Coast cities, not everything is San Francisco and some of the other cities, but a lot of things come into play to make a community livable and walkable.
What's more dangerous than not having a walkable, bikeable community? Having a partially.
Yeah.
So we are in the middle of implementing this broad ped bike plan that we actually have a budget for. We passed it, a levy to pay for all these projects, and we can't do them all at once. Of course, nobody can. So now, you're walking along, you're feeling good. It's a wide sidewalk, it's isolated, and then suddenly there's no sidewalk. You're just on the road, or you're riding your bike along in a protected bike lane, and then suddenly you have to take the lane. And it's going to be really good when we get this infrastructure in, but it takes time. It takes a lot of money, but there's a huge difference. You could really feel the difference between a ped bike friendly city and not. Yeah,
I think the Europeans have it pretty good. I mean, we studied. I was involved with some bikeway projects here, and share rows and the width of the bike lanes and all that stuff. A lot of industry and retail typically pushes back on bike lanes, unfortunately, because it takes away parking. But then, of course, it replenishes foot traffic and business in other ways, right? So, but it's hard to convince stakeholders of making that paradigm shift. That yes, this is difficult in the beginning, but in the long term, you're going to get the benefits of a more walkable, livable.
It's not even that long
Yeah.
to show the benefits. And fortunately, data is really easy to grab here to prove your point. So,
Right. So let me move to kind of what kind of initially caught my attention about Bellevue. The National Civic League's award, really one of, I think, 10 finalists, if I recall correctly, building equitable and resilient communities. How did that come about? How did you all, in the midst of COVID, and how did you rise to the challenge of actually becoming an envy of other cities in doing this? How did this happen?
well, thank you. I'm really am proud of this award for getting it during such a challenging year. And truly, our goal was exactly that: to be resilient and to be equitable. So I'm glad we applied. I'm glad we won. And I think the thing that set us apart maybe from other cities is that we were getting dollars out the door as fast as they were coming in. We identified early on our communities that had food insecurity, that had housing insecurity, that were lacking childcare all of a sudden. Some people, they weren't able to work, and then other people, their jobs got even busier, but they no longer had the schools to put their kids into. And a lot of people had their kids in schools normally where they got their breakfast and lunch, and suddenly they weren't able to do that. So their systems all fell apart on them.
Right.
And so the first thing we did is we took council contingency money, which is kind of leftover money that we set aside for the council, just in case something unbudgeted comes up that we all want to invest in. And the first thing we did, our first meeting after COVID hit, was to disperse that money to our human service organizations, who are already very good at grant making and vetting agencies, and they got that money out the door quickly. And then our large employers came in and gave us over $1 million directly into our human services fund. We got those dollars out the door. The federal government, as you know, gave money. The county, the state, every time we got money, we got it out as fast as we could. We did not do a rental eviction moratorium. Instead, we put our efforts into rental assistance.
Right.
And so it'll be interesting to see how we did with that. If we, at the end of the day, if we really did save people from owing a bunch of back rent.
Right.
But that was our big effort because it was more fair for the landlord and the tenant to do it that way. So we put millions of dollars into serving our communities here, and trying to make it so that at the end of this pandemic, which I feel like we're approaching the end now, that our community is intact.
Right. No, thank you for mentioning food insecurity. One of my pet peeves, especially during the pandemic, I really wanted to do something, and I started working with our local food banks and raise some. My neighbors all came to my house every weekend. We would gather food, and I had no problem cold calling people to donate, and those that could did. And I think really proud of various communities around the country that helped their neighbors, because I really was not used to seeing food lines in this country. It's one thing you see it in other countries, but in this country, I just couldn't believe it. So that, I think, led me into action. It sounds like your community was immediate to recognize that and respond to it as soon as you could. So,
well, I love your description of your involvement in your neighbors. I mean, we saw that as well from our Rotary clubs, just to community members. People would put signs up on social media and say, "I don't care who you are, if you need help right now, let me know."
Yeah. One little gimmick I had is once the hoarding of food was over, I also put ads on social media. So look, empty your pandemic pantry. You don't need it. So people literally would go empty all the extra cans that they bought because they thought there was going to be shortages.
Did they let go of the toilet paper?
And people donated toilet paper too. I had boxes of it in my garage. I don't know why. But I think the panic wore off, and people began to kind of get back to normal and realize to be honest, whether you live in San Diego or Bellevue, you're so blessed, you're so lucky to live in the communities that you live in, and then realizing how fragile, I think you put it perfectly, how fragile our systems are, that the smallest hiccup in our system, somebody loses a paycheck, doesn't go as a service worker, couldn't get to that retail job or what have you, waiter, instantly you could lose your house, your car, you couldn't feed your kids. I mean, I was just shocked how much of this country lives on such a fragile situation that the slightest unkind wind causes you to, lose your way. But again, also heartwarmed that people do act and take action. The food banks were overflowing, donations were coming in, and somehow we made it through the worst part of it. It sounds like there's still rippling effects. I think, as you mentioned, there could be economic rippling effects to what's happened, whether public policy put money in landlords' pockets or in renters' pockets or in retail, and whether those PPPs really worked. Many companies called me and said, "Hey, I don't really need the money. What should I do?" So we'll figure the details out later. But first things first, food insecurity, the fixing the human condition, the humanity of what was happening, that was important. The economics will have to work itself out later.
You bring up a really good point. We did kind of examine our community more closely because of this. And we knew that we had a large portion of our residents who are cost burdened, meaning that they're paying over 30% of their salary toward rent.
Right.
But what we found out is that people are cost burdened on the entire spectrum of housing. So even if you're earning over $200,000 a year,
right,
there's a large portion of individuals who are cost burdened. They're paying far more than they can actually afford for their house. And you've got a lot of low income people doing it because they want their kids to be in the school district.
Right.
And so you're right. Those people, especially the low income cost burden ones, didn't have a rainy day fund that they could tap. They did not have an emergency plan. And the juxtaposition of some of the tech workers and companies that had their best year ever,
right,
next to the workers who were told to go on furlough or just, maybe try back in 9 months was pretty compelling.
Yeah, it's shocking, really. It's funny you mentioned that. I think the inequities in our communities, whether it's Bellevue or San Diego or anywhere, it's just shocking, the difference between the haves and the have-nots. And I know, sometimes in government life, we try to even out the deck, right? And some people object and they say, "Oh no, it's a capitalist country. If they make $1 billion and their employees can't afford lunch, then so be it." And I just don't know if that's the right approach to a good society. I think you need to do everything you can to help, bring those folks up, reduce their costs, and weather the storms. That's what government's for.
Yeah, I think actually for me, my compass is equity of opportunity.
Okay.
So you may not take me up on it, but you should have the opportunity for a healthy life,
Right.
for high public safety, for access to parks, for a good education. Right. And there should be a job pipeline that you can get into if you're doing the work. Right. And beyond local government, I think that should carry into, there should be job advancement within a company. I think people should all be paid a living wage. That's just my personal opinion.
No, it's hard to argue with a living wage.
I know.
I want to make $1 billion, and I want everyone not to make a living wage, and then continue to help me feather my nest and build my empire. I don't know how that makes sense.
Let's take it a step further. I also don't want to pay taxes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have the residents of the place where I have my company pay the taxes that then subsidize my workers, right, who I don't pay enough.
Right. It just doesn't jive.
Now, I'm not criticizing my city or my companies in my city. Let's make that clear. Sure. But I'm just saying the system is a little messed up.
It is. And you mentioned taxes. Most of those folks that you say cost burden, They pay about practically a third of their income in taxes anyway. Whereas if you're actually are not an employee and you are living off your wealth or stocks, or God bless you, good for you, and nothing wrong with that. You don't pay any taxes, and you have fantastic lawyers to help you not paying any taxes. So that inequity is endemic, I think, in American life, and it just becomes more and more clear in case of a disaster or an economic downturn, right? It's because if everyone's kind of managing on, and they go to work and they make their $12 an hour and they pay their bills, and they're always going to be behind, and the rich folks are buying the $10 billion yachts, and okay, good. No one is the wiser, right? But once a disaster hits, everything crashes. And now you're face to face with those inequities in civic life. And I think government is often faced with, okay, what do I do now? What's the right public policy to right the ship, at least temporarily, so I don't create another problem down the road for me? That how do I right the ship right now, help with food insecurity, housing insecurity, while we don't rewrite the American way of doing things. So there's no easy answers in government life, sorry.
So I think, going back to this award, I think the resilient part was we supported our small businesses, and specifically our female and minority owned businesses, right, and tried to bridge them through this. We allowed restaurants to go into their parking lots and do outdoor dining. We closed out parking areas and allowed them to have tables out there. And for the restaurants that did that, it was the best year ever.
Wow.
That they'd had. So that was remarkable. And then, as I've already talked about, helping, making sure we were finding out who was really struggling in our communities and helping them. And then just the equity of looking at, who's having a boon year here, right, and tapping them, yeah, to get them to, and I mean, honestly, we have some amazing community partners in Bellevue. Amazon was an amazing community partner, Microsoft, Symetra, PSE, our Republic Services. I'm sure I'm forgetting some of our companies, but they really were at the table right off the bat saying, what can we do to help?
Wow. That part of it is good. Some people don't see it, but those companies are embedded in your community and in that region. So it's good that they stepped up to help the community. I'm happy to hear it. Now, kind of as we're emerging out of this dark chapter in American life, how do you see the recovery going? What do you see? Do you have a big budget deficit? How do you see your city coming out of this over the next couple of years?
It's interesting. When we first got into COVID, our first budget meeting was, everybody wanted to assign a letter to the curve. Was it going to be a V? Was it going to be an upside down V, a U? And I said, it's going to be a J. And so it is going to be a J. But right now, today, for our city, we are back to where we were in 2019 before COVID. Okay. So we are not where we would have been after 2 normal years, okay, but we have returned to where we were when we embarked on this odyssey. And we are recovering a bit, about 2% faster than we anticipated, which is good. Right. That's a few $1 million more in revenues than we anticipated. And I think that's going to continue exponentially.
Right. Talking with other cities, I hear that the cities that relied more on tourism had a tougher time.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Our hotel occupancy during COVID was single digits.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, probably friends and family of the hoteliers. I don't know. But yeah, San Diego got a tough break, especially some of the port hotels. Some of these hotels on the San Diego waterfront are 1,600 rooms, 1,300 rooms. They're enormous. So to go suddenly to go zero practically for a period of months. And then I think a lot of businesses had a tough time hiring people back because they were getting some incentive to not go back to work.
Well,
hiring.
especially at the rates they were being paid at.
Exactly.
Everybody's kind of seen the light that this is not enough to live on.
Right, right.
And
Yeah.
it is a real enlightening time right now to rethink all our systems.
Yeah. You mentioned that some of the tech companies in your community generally or live around the region. Uh, Tell me about your tech hub. How do you attract tech companies? How do you cater to them? How do you you mentioned equity again, because there's so much inequity with, super rich tech folks and then people that simply drive the Amazon buses, right? And there's a little bit something to look at. How do you juggle it all? How do you attract that kind of business?
Well, that's two very different questions. I think, the tech world sounds like one unified thing, and that it's very different. Cyber technology is very different from encrypting things or
Right.
from Bitcoin or cyber coins. We have, or gaming, that's a real different technology based. But they're all require creativity, and I think creating an environment that supports that kind of networking and the education of who's doing what and what's the latest out there. I've always felt that in order to attract large firms, you have to have feeder firms. So these smaller tech companies kind of feed the larger companies. Either they get bought by the large company, or people get hired from them, or they share ideas.
Right.
They get hired to provide services. So I think that ecosystem is very important to support, and we do it in a lot of different ways. I talked about networking is one. Creating, for a while there, we had low cost startup office space.
Oh, nice.
And we had, a little hub there with business advice for people. Our city still provides free business advice for startups. We do events where we track people from all over the world, and with every technology event that comes, come investors who are interested to see what's the latest. And we have a lot of investors in Bellevue. My frustration is that they don't invest enough in Bellevue companies. They're like national and international investors, and I just, I'm all for was it non-accredited investments, so that the average Joe, instead of doing a crowdfunding, actually has a little piece of the company, the local company that they believe in and they want to support. So to me, that's the missing link here.
Right.
But it is a very supportive ecosystem here in Bellevue and in the whole east side, and I should say Seattle metropolitan region.
Right.
And so it's been working well for us.
So the flip side of my question was, okay, you attract a lot of big companies, big payrolls. They also hire a lot of labor. And that labor sometimes isn't paid, a living wage. How do you reconcile, kind of, as they say, the fleas go with the dog, do you just put up with it, or is there something you can do to right that ship? How does that work?
Well, it's interesting. We've been partnering with those companies to build affordable housing in our cities and workforce housing. And again, you and I started by talking about how everybody should have a living wage.
Right.
So I don't think that excuses not paying somebody a living wage.
Right.
But I do appreciate that they're investing in the community, not just for their employees, but for anybody.
Right.
And everybody to be able to afford to live here. They also are researching, best ways to create more affordable housing, and they're at the table in conversations with what kind of policies we can put in with our incentive plans and requirements to ensure that we get the full spectrum of housing. Because right now, we're in a situation where only 10% of the housing available in Bellevue is affordable to a family of four earning under $80,000.
Wow. Yeah. No, I think
So
that makes sense. I think how you describe it, that they're around the table, you're talking about affordable housing, and that's how you kind of keep it going, keep them engaged, invested, but also part of the solution that you need to come up as a community together. With that, let me kind of ask you about the American Recovery Act, $1.9 trillion raining down on this country. What does Bellevue hope to achieve in this round of funding? What are your priorities that you hope to get funded?
this funding that we're receiving has been instrumental in our recovery. We really went out on a limb to try to continue to provide the services that people required in our city during a time when we had very little revenues. We stopped collecting business tax. We stopped collecting utility from our businesses. We gave everybody a break that we needed to. And so our revenue flow was just way down. And in order to compensate for that, we went into our reserves. Now, we're a pretty conservative city, so we had higher reserves than the average minimum. So we took it down to almost the minimum that you would want to have a reserve at. And so this money replaces all that we overspent, basically, and helps us recoup our losses, helps us pay for programs that will serve the community as they recover. We still have many people who are not earning a full paycheck, not back to where they were pre-COVID.
Right.
And there's still a lot of people whose, housing is unstable, and they are at risk of having to leave when they have to pay rent again. So we're trying to identify who those people are, what their needs are, what the challenges are. But this money helps us rehire some of the staff we had to let go of, puts back in place some of the programs that we had to put on hold. So, and it helps us reopen City Hall. We've been closed.
Wow. As you mentioned, dipping into reserves makes me think a lot of cities that had to exhaust their reserves, if they had any, probably also risked their credit rating.
Yes.
And so it's a rippling effect. Just so cities are no different than maybe an individual struggling. If their city is cost dependent and they've spent every last dime in their savings, now they can't get a good enough loan to recover from the hole they dug themselves in, right? So
well, and the funny thing is, and you'll appreciate this with your knowledge of local government, is that fortunately Bellevue has a really great city council,
right,
who's very thoughtful and works with the staff and the city manager. But there were a number of cities that the councils just kind of blew up. People left, or they took charge. There was one city council that decided to reduce the authority of the mayor.
Oh no!
So that they could just dole out the money as they wanted to, and now they're in this big bind, right, because it wasn't fiscally sound what they did. It's not easy to decide where to put the money when it's limited and you've got so much need. And I think that takes a tremendous amount of thought and expertise. And I feel blessed with the city manager that we have, Brad Miyake, and our staff is exceptional, and we have a very solid council. So we're lucky.
You are lucky, but it's not quite luck. I think your personal devotion to the city and your peers on the city council that have shepherded your city out of this dark chapter, I think, in American life is to be commended. My hat's off to you, and that's why you won the National Civic League's award. It's not by accident. It's not by the efforts of others, but it's by the sacrifices that elected officials like yourself have made. So, Mayor Lynne Robinson, thank you for spending a little time with us, giving us your insights. Please keep in touch. We really appreciate everything you're doing for your city. Thank you.
Thank you so much.